Fix my Porsche, and I'll marry you." The entire showroom burst into laughter. But 10 minutes later, not a single person in that room could find a reason to smile. The late afternoon sun spilled through the towering glass walls of Hayes Automotive's flagship showroom in downtown Dallas, casting golden reflections across polished marble floors and rows of luxury vehicles worth more than most families would earn in a lifetime. The air carried the scent of fresh leather, expensive cologne, and ambition. Employees moved briskly between displays while investors and clients mingled beneath banners celebrating the launch of the company's newest performance division. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hayes. At 36, she was one of the youngest automotive CEOs in America, known as much for her sharp business instincts as her confidence. Her tailored navy suit, flawless posture, and calm authority commanded attention wherever she went. Few people ever challenged her. Fewer still forgot her. Outside the showroom, a small crowd had gathered around a silver Porsche 911 Turbo parked near the entrance. The vehicle had arrived earlier for a promotional display, but now the engine refused to start. Several technicians had already taken a look. None had found the problem. Frustration hung in the air. "Maybe it's electrical," one technician muttered. "We already checked that," another replied. "Then why won't it start?" Nearby, Ethan Walker stood quietly holding a worn toolbox in one hand. His jeans were faded. His work boots showed years of use. At first glance, he looked completely out of place among the luxury cars and designer suits. He had only come to deliver a replacement part for a local supplier before heading home to his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. He had no intention of getting involved. Then Victoria noticed him. Her eyes drifted toward the toolbox. "You're a mechanic?" she asked. Ethan nodded politely. "Something like that." A few employees exchanged amused looks. Victoria folded her arms. "Well, if our experts can't figure it out, maybe you can." More laughter followed. Ethan glanced at the Porsche before setting down his toolbox. "I can take a look." The crowd seemed entertained by the idea. One executive smirked. Another pulled out his phone. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Tell you what," she said with a playful grin. "Fix my Porsche, and I'll marry you." The showroom erupted with laughter. Even some of the technicians joined in. Ethan heard every word. Yet his expression never changed. He simply walked toward the car. There was no anger, no embarrassment, no need to defend himself. Because some people spend their lives trying to prove who they are. Others learn they no longer have to. The laughter continued as Ethan knelt beside the Porsche and quietly opened the engine compartment. Victoria watched him for a moment, expecting him to fail like everyone else. What she didn't know was that the man crouching beside her car was carrying a secret far more valuable than anything parked inside that showroom. And before this day was over, that secret would leave her standing in complete silence. The laughter lingered for a few more seconds before slowly fading into a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Ethan Walker remained focused on the Porsche. He did not seem to notice the crowd, the expensive suits, or the amused expressions surrounding him. He simply listened. One hand rested lightly on the edge of the engine compartment, while the other moved carefully along a series of components hidden beneath the polished exterior. The showroom lights reflected off the silver paint as quiet conversations drifted through the air. "How long do you think this will take?" one investor asked. "Probably until next week," another joked. A few people chuckled. Victoria Hayes stood with her arms crossed, watching from several feet away. She expected frustration. She expected excuses. Instead, she saw something unusual. Confidence. Not the loud kind that demanded attention. The quiet kind that came from experience. Ethan leaned closer, studying a section near the rear compartment. Then he reached into his toolbox and removed a small flashlight. "Interesting," he said softly. One of the technicians stepped forward. "You found something?" Ethan nodded. "Maybe." The technician frowned. "We already checked everything." Ethan looked up. "Not everything." The words were calm, respectful, yet something about them caused the technician to fall silent. Ethan removed a small access panel and examined a connection hidden behind it. Dust floated through the bright showroom air. Somewhere across the building, a coffee machine hissed. The distant sound of a luxury sedan being moved echoed briefly through the glass structure. Then Ethan smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen him smile all afternoon. "There it is." Victoria straightened slightly. "There what is?" Ethan pointed toward a tiny damaged connector buried beneath a protective housing. A manufacturing defect. Small enough to hide. Big enough to stop the ignition sequence. Several technicians moved closer. One crouched beside him. Another adjusted his glasses. The group studied the connector in silence. Their expressions changed almost immediately. How did we miss that? One whispered. Ethan shrugged. Because everybody was looking for a complicated problem. He carefully removed the faulty piece and made a temporary adjustment using tools from his worn box. The process took less than 2 minutes. The crowd watched every movement now. Nobody was laughing anymore. Even Victoria found herself leaning forward. Ethan closed the compartment and stepped back. Try it now. One of the technicians climbed into the driver's seat. The room seemed to hold its breath. A moment later, the engine came alive with a smooth, powerful growl that echoed through the showroom. Several people blinked in surprise. One executive nearly dropped his phone. The Porsche purred perfectly. No warning lights. No hesitation. Just flawless performance. Silence spread across the room. Victoria stared at the vehicle. Then at Ethan. Then back at the vehicle again. That is impossible, one technician muttered. No, Ethan replied quietly. Just overlooked. Victoria took a slow step toward him. For the first time since they met, the confidence in her expression carried a hint of uncertainty. She had expected a mechanic. She had expected luck. What she had just witnessed felt different. And as Ethan calmly packed away his tools, she found herself asking a question she could not quite explain. Who exactly was Ethan Walker? Victoria Hayes had spent years learning how to read people. Investors, competitors, politicians, journalists. Most revealed themselves within minutes. Yet as Ethan Walker lifted his toolbox and calmly headed toward the exit, she realized she could not read him at all. Mr. Walker, she called. Ethan stopped and turned. Yes, ma'am. Would you stay for a few minutes? He glanced at the old watch on his wrist. I would rather not. I need to pick up my daughter. The answer surprised her. Most people looked for reasons to stay near power. Ethan was looking for reasons to leave it. Your daughter? Victoria asked. Ethan nodded. Lily. She gets out of school in 40 minutes. For a moment, something softened in his expression. Not pride. Not obligation. Something deeper. The kind of quiet love that could not be purchased or performed. Victoria hesitated. Then I will not keep you. Ethan offered a polite smile and walked away. Through the massive showroom windows, she watched his aging pickup truck disappear into Dallas traffic. Long after he was gone, she found herself staring at the empty parking space. The next afternoon, Victoria attended a community fundraising event sponsored by Hayes Automotive. Local families gathered in a city park filled with food trucks, music, and small business booths. Children ran across freshly cut grass while parents sat beneath large white tents seeking relief from the Texas heat. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and posing for photographs. Then she saw him. Ethan sat at a picnic table beneath a shade tree. Across from him sat a young blonde girl around 10 years old. Lily. She laughed as Ethan handed her a paper plate stacked with barbecue and corn on the cob. You got extra sauce again, she teased. I have no idea what you were talking about, Ethan replied. The evidence is on your shirt, Dad. He looked down and laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind that reached his eyes. Victoria found herself smiling. The billionaire executive she presented to the world suddenly felt very far away from the simple scene unfolding beneath that tree. Lily noticed. Her first. Dad, that is the Porsche lady. Ethan turned and immediately stood. Good afternoon. Victoria approached slowly. I did not expect to see you here. Lily wanted to come. And Dad never says no to free barbecue, Lily added. Ethan sighed dramatically. I am being betrayed by my own child. Lily giggled. Victoria laughed before she could stop herself. The conversation felt strangely easy. No boardrooms. No reporters. No expectations. Just 3 people sharing a warm Texas afternoon. Then Lily asked a question that caught Victoria completely off guard. Are you Dad's friend? Victoria opened her mouth, but found no answer waiting. Ethan looked equally surprised. For a brief second, all 3 sat in silence. And somewhere inside Victoria Hayes, a small crack appeared in the carefully built walls she had spent years constructing around her heart. The question lingered in the air long after Lily asked it. Victoria Hayes opened her mouth, searching for an answer that should have been simple. Yet none came. Ethan rescued the moment with a gentle smile. Miss Hayes is someone I recently met. Lily tilted her head. That sounds like a fancy way of saying maybe. Victoria laughed softly. Your daughter is very observant. I know, Ethan replied. It keeps me humble. The afternoon drifted by more quickly than any of them expected. They talked about school projects, favorite books, and the small things that often mattered most. Victoria found herself listening more than speaking. It had been years since she sat across from people who expected nothing from her. No contracts, no negotiations, no quarterly reports, just conversation. As the sun lowered over the Dallas skyline, families began packing up lawn chairs and picnic blankets. Ethan checked his watch. We should get going. Lily gathered her things and stood. It was nice seeing you again, Porsche lady. Victoria smiled. Goodbye, Lily. As Ethan and Lily walked toward their pickup truck, Victoria watched them disappear into the growing evening shadows. The sight stayed with her longer than she cared to admit. 3 days later, Ethan received an unexpected phone call while working at the small repair shop where he spent most of his weekdays. The garage smelled of motor oil and warm metal. Ceiling fans hummed overhead. Outside, summer heat shimmered across the pavement. Ethan Walker speaking. Mr. Walker, this is Victoria Hayes. Ethan paused. Good afternoon. I would like to invite you to Hayes Automotive headquarters tomorrow. Ethan frowned slightly. For what? I believe you might be able to help with something. There was a brief silence. I am not looking for a job. Victoria almost smiled through the phone. Neither am I. Just lunch and a conversation. The next day, Ethan arrived at the headquarters building wearing clean jeans, a button-down shirt, and the same quiet confidence he carried everywhere. The 70-story glass tower reflected the Texas sun like a mirror. Employees hurried through the lobby carrying tablets and coffee cups. Ethan looked completely different from everyone around him, yet somehow entirely comfortable. Victoria greeted him personally and escorted him upstairs. The executive conference room overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Several department heads sat around a long polished table. Among them was Ryan Cole, the company's chief operating officer. His expensive suit looked tailored to perfection. His smile did not. This is the mechanic? Ryan asked. The room grew slightly uncomfortable. Victoria maintained her composure. This is Ethan Walker. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Interesting choice. Ethan simply nodded and took a seat. The meeting began. Engineers discussed a major electric performance vehicle project scheduled for release the following year. Charts filled large presentation screens. Technical diagrams rotated across digital displays. Ethan listened quietly, very quietly. Then one engineer explained a critical battery cooling system. Ethan's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Victoria saw it immediately. Something wrong? She asked. Ethan studied the diagram for a few seconds. The room waited. Ryan smirked. Please tell me the local mechanic found $1 billion mistake. Ethan looked up calmly. Actually, he said, I think I did. The confidence vanished from several faces. Ryan laughed. Nobody else did. Ryan Cole leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself. This should be interesting, he said. A few executives exchanged uncertain glances while the engineering team sat motionless around the conference table. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Dallas skyline behind them. The afternoon sun reflected against neighboring towers, filling the room with warm light. Ethan Walker remained calm. He studied the digital schematic displayed on the massive screen at the front of the room. Your battery cooling design works under normal conditions, he said. The problem appears during sustained high-load operation. One engineer frowned. That is impossible. We ran hundreds of simulations. Ethan nodded. I believe you did. Ryan smirked. Then what exactly is the problem? Ethan stepped toward the display. He pointed to a section of the thermal management system. This coolant routing creates a temperature imbalance between modules 7 and 8 during prolonged acceleration. Several engineers looked at each other. One immediately pulled up additional data. Another adjusted his glasses and stared at the screen. Ryan laughed softly. You figured all that out from one presentation. Ethan shrugged. The numbers were right there. The room grew quieter. Victoria Hayes watched carefully. There was no arrogance in Ethan's voice. No attempt to impress anyone. He spoke the way a person spoke when truth mattered more than attention. If Module 7 overheats, Ethan continued, the control system compensates by increasing cooling flow. That creates a secondary imbalance here. He pointed again. Eventually efficiency drops. Range drops. Customer complaints begin. Then recalls. One of the senior engineers suddenly sat forward. Wait. His fingers moved rapidly across a tablet. Run the extended performance simulation. Another engineer entered new parameters. The room filled with the sound of keyboards clicking. Ryan rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous. Nobody answered him. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then another. Finally, a warning notification appeared on the display. A bright red indicator flashed across. The simulation results. The lead engineer froze. No way. Another engineer checked the calculations. Then checked them again. He is right. The words landed like a stone in still water. The conference room fell silent. Victoria looked from the screen to Ethan. How serious is it? She asked. The engineering director swallowed hard. If this reaches production unchanged, the company could face massive warranty costs. Another engineer added quietly. Possibly hundreds of millions. Ryan's confident smile disappeared. That cannot be correct. It is, the director replied. The flaw exists. Nobody laughed now. Nobody checked their phones. Nobody looked away from the screen. Ethan returned to his chair as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He folded his hands and waited. Victoria could hardly believe what she had witnessed. An entire engineering division had missed a problem hidden inside a project worth billions. Yet a man everyone assumed was just a local mechanic had found it within minutes. The afternoon light softened across the conference room. Dust floated through quiet beams of sunlight. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, helicopters crossed the distant skyline. Inside the room, however, nobody seemed aware of anything except Ethan Walker. Victoria felt a strange mixture of gratitude and curiosity. The more she learned about him, the less he made sense. And for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, Victoria Hayes found herself wondering whether the most valuable person in her company did not actually work for her at all. The meeting officially ended 30 minutes later, but nobody seemed eager to leave. Executives gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. Engineers remained near the display screens, rerunning calculations they had already confirmed 3 times. The flaw was real. The risk was real. And the man who found it had walked into the building carrying an old toolbox and expecting nothing more than a conversation. Ethan Walker stood near the conference room windows looking out across Dallas. The evening sun painted the skyline in shades of gold and amber. Far below, streams of headlights moved through the city. Like ribbons of light. He looked completely at peace. Victoria Hayes approached quietly. You saved us from a very expensive mistake today. Ethan smiled faintly. Your engineers will fix it. Only because you found it first. Before Ethan could answer, Ryan Cole appeared beside them. His expression remained professional, but the edge in his voice was impossible to miss. I have been reviewing your observations. Ethan nodded. And you clearly know more than you claim. Victoria glanced toward Ryan. What exactly are you implying? Ryan ignored her question. His eyes stayed locked on Ethan. Most mechanics do not identify advanced thermal balancing failures from a presentation slide. Ethan remained calm. Maybe I have seen similar systems before. Ryan folded his arms. Where? Silence followed. Not an uncomfortable silence. A deliberate one. Ethan simply chose not to answer. Ryan's frustration became visible. Convenient. Victoria stepped forward. That is enough. Ryan gave a polite nod, but his eyes never left Ethan. I disagree. I think we should know who we invited into our executive meetings. Ethan finally spoke. That is your choice. He picked up his jacket from the chair. If there is nothing else, I should get home. To your daughter, Victoria said. Ethan smiled. To Lily. He left the conference room moments later. The doors closed softly behind him. Yet even after he was gone, his presence seemed to remain. The next morning, Ryan arrived at headquarters before sunrise. Most of the building was still dark. Cleaning crews moved quietly through hallways while security personnel monitored empty lobbies. Ryan sat alone in his office, staring at a file on his computer screen. Ethan Walker, age 42, owner of a small repair business. Widower. Single father. Nothing extraordinary, at least on the surface. Ryan frowned. Something did not fit. He began digging deeper. Employment records. Professional registrations. Patent databases. Engineering archives. For nearly an hour, he found nothing unusual. Then suddenly he stopped. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. One search result had appeared from an old engineering publication nearly 12 years earlier. Ryan clicked it. The article loaded slowly. His eyes widened. Then another result appeared. Then another. Technical journals. Patent filings. Industry awards. Ryan leaned forward in disbelief. No way. The man from the repair shop was connected to projects that had reshaped modern electric vehicle development. Not as a contributor. Not as a consultant. As a lead designer. Ryan stared at the screen. The quiet mechanic was not who anyone thought he was. And as the morning sunlight began creeping across his office floor, Ryan realized that Ethan Walker had been hiding a secret far larger than anyone inside Hayes Automotive could possibly imagine. Ryan Cole did not wait. By mid-morning, he was standing outside Victoria Hayes's office holding a folder thick with printed reports. You need to see this. Victoria looked up from her desk. The seriousness in his voice immediately caught her attention. What happened? Ryan placed the folder in front of her. Ethan Walker happened. Victoria opened the file. The first page contained an old photograph. A younger Ethan stood beside a prototype vehicle at an international engineering conference. The next page revealed patent registrations, then industry awards, then technical publications cited by some of the largest automotive companies in America. Victoria stared at the documents in disbelief. This cannot be right. It is, Ryan replied. I verified everything twice. She turned another page. Ethan's name appeared as lead designer on breakthrough battery technologies that had transformed the electric vehicle market years earlier. Another page listed him as a co-founder of a startup later acquired for hundreds of millions of dollars. Every page seemed more impossible than the last. Why would someone walk away from all of this? Victoria whispered. Ryan shook his head. That is not even the most surprising part. He handed her a final document. An article from nearly a decade earlier. Victoria began reading. The office grew quiet. Outside her windows, Dallas moved through another busy weekday. Inside, time seemed to slow. The article told the story of Ethan Walker and his wife, Sarah. Together they had built a promising future. Together they had created innovative technologies that attracted investors across the country. Then everything changed. Sarah became seriously ill. Ethan gradually stepped away from public life. Board meetings became hospital visits. Product launches became long nights beside her hospital bed. Investors urged him to stay focused on the company. Ethan chose his family instead. When Sarah eventually passed away, he resigned from every leadership position he held. He sold his remaining shares. He disappeared from the industry almost completely. Victoria lowered the page. Her chest felt unexpectedly heavy. He left all of it. Ryan nodded. For his wife. Then for his daughter. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence felt different now. Not confusion. Understanding. Victoria thought about the small repair shop. The worn toolbox. The old pickup truck. The way Ethan always checked his watch because Lily was waiting. Suddenly everything made sense. He had not fallen from success. He had willingly walked away from it. That evening, as the Texas sun settled behind the skyline, Ethan sat in the bleachers of a middle school soccer field watching Lily practice. Parents chatted nearby while children laughed across the grass. The air smelled of fresh-cut turf and summer dust. Ethan looked content. Completely content. He cheered when Lily made a good pass. He smiled when she waved from the field. A few rows behind him, unnoticed, Victoria Hayes stood quietly beside the fence. For the first time, she was not seeing a mechanic. She was not seeing a mystery. She was seeing a man who had given up wealth, recognition, and prestige for something far more valuable. And as she watched him laugh at something Lily shouted from the field, Victoria felt something inside her shift. The man she once underestimated had become someone she could no longer stop thinking about. Victoria Hayes could not stop thinking about what she had learned. For days, the reports sat on her desk unopened because she no longer needed them. The facts were already burned into her memory. Ethan Walker had built the kind of career people spent lifetimes chasing. He had earned respect from engineers, investors, and industry leaders across the country. Yet when life demanded a choice between success and family, he had chosen family without hesitation. The realization unsettled her in ways she could not explain. One evening, she drove to a quiet lakeside park on the edge of the city after receiving a brief message from Ethan agreeing to meet. The summer air carried the scent of water and freshly cut grass. The sun was beginning its slow descent, turning the lake into a sheet of liquid gold. Ethan sat alone on a wooden bench overlooking the water. Victoria approached slowly. "Thank you for coming." Ethan smiled politely. "You sounded serious." She sat beside him. For several moments, neither spoke. Ducks drifted across the lake. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. The peaceful sounds only made the silence between them feel more significant. Finally, Victoria turned toward him. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Ethan looked out across the water. "Tell them what? Who you are?" A faint smile crossed his face. "I never hid who I am. You know what I mean." Ethan nodded slowly. The breeze moved gently through the trees overhead. "Because it stopped matching." Victoria stared at him. "Stopped matching." The awards stopped matching. The money stopped matching. The titles stopped matching. He paused. "When Sarah got sick, everything became very simple." Victoria lowered her eyes. "I read about her." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She was the smartest person I ever knew." His voice remained steady, but there was a depth behind it that words could barely reach. "When she was gone, Lily was all I had left." Victoria felt her throat tighten. Ethan continued. "People thought I sacrificed my career." He shook his head gently. "They were wrong." "Wrong. I did not give anything up." He smiled softly. "I gained more time with my daughter." The words settled between them like a truth too powerful to challenge. Victoria suddenly remembered the showroom. The jokes. The laughter. The assumptions she had made about him. Shame quietly crept into her heart. "I owe you an apology." Ethan turned toward her. "For what?" "For judging you before I knew you." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Then he laughed softly. "Victoria, you are not the first person to do that. Still, we all see what we expect to see." His kindness somehow made the apology harder to bear. Victoria felt her eyes grow moist. For the first time in years, she did not know what to say. The woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals. The woman who always had the perfect answer. The woman who never lost control. Now she sat speechless beside a man in a simple button-down shirt who had quietly rewritten everything she believed about success. Ethan watched the sunset reflecting across the lake. Victoria watched him. And in that moment, surrounded by silence, she finally understood why every room seemed to change when Ethan Walker entered it. It was not because of his intelligence. It was not because of his accomplishments. It was because his character spoke louder than either of them ever could. The weeks that followed brought changes no one could have predicted. Hayes Automotive quietly implemented the corrections Ethan had identified, preventing what could have become one of the most costly mistakes in the company's history. The engineering team gained a new respect for humility. Ryan Cole became noticeably quieter during meetings. And Victoria Hayes found herself looking forward to moments that had nothing to do with business. Some evenings, she joined Ethan and Lily for dinner at a small family restaurant outside the city. Other times, she attended Lily's soccer games, sitting in the bleachers with other parents who had no idea they were sharing snacks with one of the most powerful executives in Texas. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something she had almost forgotten. Peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, Hayes Automotive hosted a charity event celebrating local education programs. Employees, community leaders, and families filled the company's outdoor plaza. Music drifted through the air. Children played games beneath colorful tents. The atmosphere felt warm and genuine. Ethan arrived with Lily shortly before the ceremony began. As they walked through the crowd, dozens of employees greeted him. Not because of his accomplishments, not because of his past, but because of the person they had come to know. Victoria watched from the stage. A smile touched her lips. Months earlier, she had seen a mechanic carrying an old toolbox. Now she saw a man whose quiet dignity had changed countless lives without demanding recognition. When the formal presentations ended, Victoria stepped to the microphone. The crowd slowly settled into silence. She spoke about community, about character, about second chances. Then she paused. "Several months ago," she said, "I met someone who reminded me that success is not measured by what we earn. It is measured by what we choose to value." Ethan immediately looked uncomfortable. Lily grinned beside him. The audience followed Victoria's gaze toward the father and daughter standing near the front row. Gentle applause began spreading through the crowd. Ethan lowered his head modestly. When the applause faded, Victoria stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward him. The plaza became strangely quiet. "Do you remember something you once heard me say?" she asked. Ethan laughed softly. "That depends." Victoria smiled. I think you know exactly which one. A few people nearby exchanged curious glances. Ethan shook his head. I believe it involved a Porsche. Laughter rippled through the audience. Victoria nodded. It did. She took a slow breath. Back then I thought I was making a joke. The crowd listened carefully. But life has a funny way of teaching lessons. Her eyes met Ethan's. You fixed more than a car. Ethan stood speechless. For perhaps the first time in his life, words seemed difficult to find. Victoria continued. You reminded me what respect looks like. What grace looks like. What real strength looks like. Lily's eyes widened. Several employees smiled knowingly. Victoria's voice softened. And if I am being completely honest, you also repaired a heart that had been broken by ambition, disappointment, and loneliness for far too long. Silence settled across the plaza. Not awkward silence. Not uncertain silence. The kind of silence that appears when everyone present recognizes a truth. Ethan looked at Lily. Lily smiled and gave him a small encouraging nod. Then he looked back at Victoria. I never expected any of this. Victoria smiled through shining eyes. Neither did I. The autumn breeze moved gently through the trees as the crowd watched two people who had come from entirely different worlds discover what truly mattered. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by respect, redemption, and second chances, nobody remembered the joke anymore. They only remembered the man whose character had silenced an entire room and the woman wise enough to finally listen.